In today's podcast on the Leadership Initiative, we're going to be discussing the role of self-belief, how to find life balance, how to increase the level of impact in your life as a leader, and how to buy time back in your life for you and your family. Those are the things we're going to be talking about today, all critical components of leadership and living a full life at the same time, both personally and professionally.
At Initiative One, we're igniting a leadership revolution by helping organizations eliminate the drama, improve decision-making, and win as a team. Join Dr. Fred Johnson on the Leadership Initiative podcast as we uncover insights to maximize your impact and transform your life.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Fred Johnson. I'm the founder of Initiative One. Welcome to the Leadership Initiative podcast. Today, I'm joined by a very special person in my life. She is my partner in life. She is the CEO of the company that I founded 25 years ago. We're going to talk about why we made that change in a few minutes, but we're really going to talk about with Tracy how leadership has changed so much in the last 25 years. And we're going to explore those answers together. Tracy, I want to welcome you to the Leadership Initiative.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fred. I'm glad to be here, always.
So, Tracy, let's just dive right into this. How did you had a very successful career as a chief nursing officer of a very substantial health system here in Wisconsin. Walk us through the story of how you ended up moving from one career that is almost completely different. And the reason I'm asking that, we now live in a society that when I was growing up, it was very common to read the paper and see who was in the latest gold watch ceremony. The gold watch ceremony was given to employees that had been at an institution or a company for 50 years, and it was very common. Those days are done. In fact, the research shows that today the person who leaves college and to the point many years from now when they retire, they will have found up to 3 different careers and up to 23 different jobs within their total career. So the world has changed a lot. One of the questions that because this is my second career as well, is do you feel like all of your previous times in your previous job was wasted? And so that's question number 2. Question 1 is, how'd you get here? And question 2, do you feel that all that education, all those years of pouring into another institution was wasted?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, number 1. And I think, let me talk about journey first. So when I went into healthcare, my purpose really was around, I wanted to take care of people. I wanted to connect with people. I wanted to make sure that I was making a difference in people's lives, right? That's purpose. And so when I went into healthcare and started my nursing career, initially it was with patients. Initially it was with bedside nursing care. However, what attracted me more in my nursing career was being able to lead other nurses and grow and develop in the business of healthcare. And really, as you begin to know the dynamics of any business, you really become more ingrained in how decisions are made, how problems get solved. And a lot of that work that I did in healthcare, we worked through lean processes. So even at the time, because of how forward-thinking the hospital was, we were in lean manufacturing as applied to healthcare.
I remember you talked about that you would go to Boston with members of your team on a regular basis, and you would learn the most advanced processes and how to become more efficient, how to become more effective with least resources. I mean, you were into cutting edge things way back then.
Yeah, it was definitely, my career was definitely and continues to be influenced by that work with Institute for Healthcare Improvement as the place that we went out in Boston. And the work that we did at IHI was actually always about how do you grow, how do you improve, how do you get better as a leader and lead your organization to better outcomes and impact. And so it just, in my healthcare background, it was applied to the patient, right? It was applied because we were a nonprofit. We were needing to reinvest in ourselves. It's still, nonprofit doesn't mean that you lose money every year. It means that you're able to take that investment and really provide additional care to the community that you're serving. And so for the work that I did in healthcare, it applied as I grew in my leadership role and went on for my MBA and really learning the business of healthcare. It allowed me to lead differently than I had ever led before. And one of the things that was missing in all of that early learning, I went from a technical nurse to leadership role after leadership role after leadership role. And and we've seen this in our company, if that leader is not growing as their role and responsibility is growing, there usually is a failure, right? A failure of something because they haven't developed the right skill set to really be successful at that higher level.
And we're not really talking about technical skill.
No, we're talking about leadership skill. And what I mean by that is there's high burnout in healthcare. High burnout in healthcare. People lose their passion, just like they do in public education, just like they do in certain industries where it is common to have people who are burned out. Well, leadership is always thought to be about that position and entitled and be applied at a level where somebody has a responsibility for a team. And when I met you and when we went through the process for the first time, you flipped that whole scenario for me. You cannot lead other people until you lead yourself first. And the question was all of that period of time a waste of time? It was 20 years of my life, right? And education in healthcare and education in business as applied to healthcare. It was very specific what I had gone through, and it was to be better at the work that I was doing. However, I would not be able to lead people today had I not made the pivot that you taught me back then about how I needed to be leading myself first. And so I think about some of the key principles: boundary setting, making sure that you're really taking care of yourself first, putting the oxygen mask. You said it back 20 years ago when I first met you. Well, what does putting the oxygen mask mean to a leader in an organization who's leading, 200, 300, 400 other people? It's vital. It's imperative. And so everything has woven. I think about it as my tapestry of my life and my leadership that has led me to this point. Not a waste of time, but how you can connect dots backwards, but you also can connect those dots forward in getting better as a leader.
I remember we've been taught in our society for decades that the mark of a leader is that you put everybody else first ahead of yourself. As a former pastor, I was taught that. Then I realized that that's not true. In fact, how can you lead for the long term if you're burned out? How can you lead others to grow if you're not growing yourself? How can you hold other people accountable if you won't receive accountability from anyone else? And so people think that's a nice little touchy-feely mantra, but it really is foundational for leadership. You can't ask your people to do what you're not willing to do yourself. And we often talk about the analogy of a well. A leader is essentially someone who's giving of.
Hold on. Was that a well or a whale?
Sorry, this is my southern accent. It's well, W-E-L-L, pronounced like whale.
Thank you.
At
Just wanted to clarify.
Thank you. At least in West Virginia, we call it whale. Whale, W-E-L-L. It makes perfect sense.
For those of you who speak English, it's a well.
Okay. So, I'm so hurt that you would talk about
I'm trying to throw you off.
So leadership is about giving. And it's about giving so that and believing in others and pouring yourself into others. Well, if you take a well, W-E-L-L, and you keep pumping that well, but there are no streams that are coming into that well at the deepest sources, eventually what happens to that well?
Runs dry.
It runs dry. And before it runs dry, it's working harder than ever before, but it's producing things like the poison, the oil remnants that some farmer poured down 50 years ago, the toxins. We call that in organizational burnout, that you're giving not out of a sense of joy, not out of a sense of gratitude and appreciation. You're giving out of a sense of nothing more than obligation and duty, and that I've made a commitment and I need to honor it, which are all important things, but they're not driven out of something that you love doing. And so we find if you don't have ways to constantly refill that well, you cannot lead effectively in the long term. I mean, what's your response to that?
Well, the people who come to us who ask us for help or ask us questions about leadership, that the number one challenge that they have is burnout. It is burnout. And we play a lot of roles. This year we started our women's executive cohort, and one of the striking things that one of the leaders said in the group is that people play so many roles in their lives, and life happens. There are situations that you have to respond to personally, professionally, and if people don't give themselves grace, if people haven't practiced what it looks like to be on purpose versus being driven, those are all skill sets that need to be talked about. And oftentimes, the resistance that we get is that feels more therapy-based or more soft skill stuff. And the reality of it is, if we want our workforce to be healthy, if we want our team to be accomplishing great things, you have to pull that back into purpose. Otherwise, you will have a team that is burned out and performing for the sake of performing, not out of the like you described, out of the true stewardship of their gifts and what they want to accomplish in the companies that they're working in.
That leads to another question. I remember years ago when I would ask a group individually, what are your biggest ambitions? Why do you want to expose yourself to leadership transformation processes? And I would hear things like, well, I want to widen my responsibility. I want to figure out how to go up the ladder another notch. If I'm a woman, I want to figure out how to break through that unfair glass ceiling.
Yeah.
And today we hear something completely different. When I will ask people often in a room, how many of you feel that your life is on the edge of being out of control? That everyone else's expectations are driving you, and that your life feels like a a 5-pound bag that you're trying to squeeze 10 pounds of flour in. And for that reason, today, the number one thing that we hear from leaders as what they need most in is, how do I do my job well and with excellence and yet have life balance? I remember you worked for a CEO who had an expectation of you that he stated that family needs to come second, and that he had an expectation that you were going to be putting in 60 to 80 hours a week. And if you didn't do it, it was a proof test of your loyalty. How did that work out for you?
That did not work out for me. You know that.
In the long run, you just went, there's got to be, there's got to be something more.
You lose sight of things. You lose sight of who you are. You lose sight of what you're trying to actually accomplish. And again, I go back to, it is more performance driven. And when it's being driven outside of you by the organization or by a leader that you're trying to please, or you're trying to, you have to perform for, it typically ends up not such a great scenario. Somebody pays a price in that moment or in that period of time, and oftentimes it is the leader who feels obligated to do that. Now, you're asking the question today, here's a question for you. I don't see that in the new generations. They'll walk before they will put up with that. I say put up with that. They want to be a part of impactful teams, but they will not do it at the expense of their families or personal time or being able to have balance. That's my experience in the teams that I'm working with younger generations than us.
You know, I'll give you an example. Just this past week, I was working with a group of young leaders. They were all in their late 20s, early 30s. And one of them said, you know, my dad, I just understood that the person who really was going to raise us was my mom. And that my dad was there to do all of the, quote, outside stuff. And that it was just understood that if we had a ball game, it just wasn't an expectation that my dad was going to be there, because my dad, work had to be first. And you know, I don't want to do that. I paid a price for that. And I don't want my children to pay the same price. I want my children to know that they were the number one priority. And that doesn't mean that work, your professional life, is not a huge commitment. The fact is, you can do both. And we've learned that by the way, people get all caught up in a misunderstanding about work-life balance.
It's so funny that you're describing this. I just had a coaching session this morning with somebody.
Well, tell me how you coached them through. What is work-life balance?
It's the thing that we always hear, that it's, you can go with it. People always think of it like a teeter-totter. And teeter-totters, you're either in balance at work and at the top, or you're in balance at home and at the top. And if you're up here at home, you're down here at work.
So one of the other is always paying a price.
Right.
And work-life balance under that definition is alternatives, so that over a long period of time, the sacrifices for the other are the same. We don't look at life balance that way. We see that as always a perpetual trade-off of a win-lose situation. Here's how we describe life balance. Life balance is when, number one, you're taking care of yourself, that you're doing things in your life that provide an outlet, a moment where you are completely free in your mind. doing this work, I remember in the early days when I was so scared of failure, and I was so scared that this company would not survive, and I was a one-person show. I remember I would do 17 groups a week of 3 hours each session. That didn't include all the planning. That didn't include all the behind-the-scenes work. And by the end of a 9-week session, 17 hours a week, I was fried. I had nothing left. And you certainly didn't find the best version of me. And you certainly did not want to be sitting in on sessions with someone that was burned to a crisp. But what I found was real life balance was that I had to be disciplined to set aside those times. I'll give you some examples. I have in my life what I call purposeful, non-purpose activities. Those things are, I love the landscape. I love working on projects around the house. I love being in my tractor that requires such focus that while you're doing that, you're not thinking about the burden at work. You're not thinking about the conflict. Those are things that I do that while I'm engaged in that, it allows my mind to rest and to heal. That is a discipline of leadership. And yet we often think that that is being selfish. It's actually not being selfish. It's being responsible, because it allows me to come to those moments in my professional life where I'm refreshed, where the water in the well is not coming from the dregs from the bottom, it's coming from the pure water that's overflowing the top. That is a leadership gift, and it's a leadership requirement today that was not needed 50 years ago. We teach that what technology does is it exposes information to more people in rapid fire timing. And when you increase the amount of ideas times the volume of people, it increases the speed of life. And so we talk about that our grandparents had 55% more leisure time in their life because life was slower. And part of life balance is having enough self-belief in yourself to set boundaries. Boundaries were not that critical 50 years ago. Would you find the role of boundaries and life balance and self-belief, all of that comes together? Talk to us about that.
I think that's the intersection where leaders have to make choices, right? You have to know what you're saying yes to and what you're saying no to, and why you're saying yes and no. And getting past the, I think it's the mindset that everybody else has to come first before you. And it is a discipline. There's definitely a discipline to how that happens and what happens.
And yet, if I have we teach that the lower my self-belief is, in that my value comes from who I am. We teach that our research has shown that the average person has a self-belief level of around 2.7 on a scale of 0 to 10, which means I'm not enough. And Maslow's work was about the fact that every one of us have a need to matter. Every one of us have a need to make meaningful contributions and not just take up space on the planet. He called that self-actualization. How do we maximize our abilities to live a meaningful, impactful life beyond my days? And so we know that is why purpose is so critical. If you are operating by a low self-esteem or self-belief level, we call that a performance-based person. That my value is not based upon what happens in me. It's what others think about me on the outside and how they judge me. And so my whole sense of worth and contribution is based upon the opinions of others. So what does that have to do with boundaries? If I'm at 2.7, I won't tell someone no because they may be disappointed in me. And if they're disappointed in me, I'll be disappointed in me. And so that's another reason why this whole notion of boundaries and self-belief are so critical in leadership. It sounds, again, touchy-feely. But today, if I'm not setting boundaries against the unceasing demand that's being poured upon us, that other people, technology has brought more people into our lives, and they all have demands of us. And so talk about purpose, talk about values and critical goals, how those are all so essential. By the way, less than 1% of people actually make decisions and set boundaries according to purpose, values, and critical goals. Talk to us about why having a decision frame is so critical to setting boundaries that is necessary for life balance.
So when you're describing all of that, it brings to mind we all have only finite energy, finite time, and finite ideas to bring to the table every single day. And I think about that burnout conversation we just had. If you are in burnout and you have finite energy, it's diminished that much more. And if you're a leader who isn't comfortable setting boundaries based on your purpose, based on your core values, based on your goals, whether you want to say it or not, you will stop putting energy into the things that matter for the organization or for even accomplishing your own things because you're so limited. You're so limited. And so I always think people think currency, money, is the finite thing. And the reality of it is in American life, we have lots of choices, lots of options, lots of freedom. Like you said, as information and access to information comes to us, we can learn just about anything that we want. And so learning and growing in the boundary setting and really knowing what's on purpose for you. And what I think about from a purpose standpoint is what energizes you. What are the things that you love to do, where your gifts and passions can be maximized, where your strengths can be tapped into? That's where the magic of the team starts to turn on. And the work that we do in organizations, if people aren't aware of that, if people haven't explored that in their own lives, they can't possibly know their contribution to the organization. And so if people think it's so magical to have a high-performing team and have a team that's really gelling together, but that gel doesn't happen until people know each other, know themselves, and that goes back to leading ourselves first. That's where purpose, core values, and goals comes in.
So I'm often asked this question, something like this. I've heard ad nauseum.
Yeah.
That you got to set boundaries. You got to set boundaries.
Oh, I love that.
You got to set boundaries. I don't know what to say yes to and what to say no to. How can I set a boundary if I don't know how to do it? If I don't know, I don't have a criteria to determine what I should say yes to and no to. Could you talk about why this work addresses that?
Yeah, the personal work is really important for a leader, and it's that exploration of energy, of your resource, of what your skills, talents, and abilities are, both as it relates to the team, as it relates to family, as it relates to finance, as it relates to vocation, as it relates to all aspects of your life, a very holistic look at things, because we can't grow unless we know where we are currently, right? And so boundaries are about saying, I'm going to focus in. I'm thinking of the word that Eli uses at home, our 15-year-old. I'm going to lock in for the next, 6 to 12 months, and I'm really going to make progress in this area. Because day in and day out, things fall into our laps every single day, right? I mean, if we wake up in the morning, there will be a boatload of things, options, choices that we have to decide. You know, it goes, I think of Steve Jobs, goes to what we're going to wear that day, what we're going to eat that day, what choices. We have choices every single day. And the discipline of those simple choices even matters, right? For our health, for our well-being, for what our mindset looks like, what we're consuming. And so all of that plays itself into leadership from the standpoint of, do you know how you're leading yourself first before you can even begin to propose that you would lead a team? And help them, because the struggle is there for everybody. And if you're not leading it well yourself, your team will pick up that in a nanosecond.
So you talked about currency. What I've found with our young leaders is they actually stress the other currency. The first currency is money. But what we have found, the currency of time, is even more important to them than the currency of money,
Yes.
which means I want to use my time as effectively as possible so I'm replenished. I'm making a meaningful contribution professionally, but I'm also present at home with my family. How do I do all those three things? And that's what we talk about. We talk about that in our process. Our research has shown the average person's stress level will go down by 20%. Well, how did you do that? What magic tool did you come up? We say it's not magic. Let's walk through for them the whole principle that we teach of the Pareto Principle.
Okay.
The Pareto
Love
Principle,
that.
the Pareto Principle teaches that if you have 10 things on your plate, just 2 of those will give you 80% of your desired impact. Now, to measure your impact, you got to know what your purpose is. You got to know where the goal line is. If we talk about a football team can move the ball 5 yards forward or backwards. If they don't know where the goal line is, they don't know if it was forward or backwards. Your purpose is, what is the goal line? What gives me the highest impact and the greatest joy while using the least amount of resources? And so you have to know your purpose in order to measure what is most impactful. Otherwise, it's a crapshoot. I'm throwing stuff up on the wall and hope it sticks. And so the first thing is you understand that 20% of your activity is going to give you 80% of your impact.
Right.
We talk about leaders measure their success not by how busy that they are, but by how impactful that they are. So we know what we call those the ones and twos. What are the things in my life? I may not be able to do them every day, but I've got to make sure that those ones and twos are not neglected. That's where I get maximum impact with minimal time and effort. That's where you begin to buy back time in your life. Now, talk to them about what 3 through 7s are.
So 3 through 7s, I was alluding earlier, you wake up every day and things just show up, right? Like pay the rent things. You've got to pay the bills. You've got to feed the kids. You've got to get to work. Those are 3 through 7 things. We call them the pay the rent. And pay the rent is unceasing. And
it has to be done.
It has to be done.
Yeah.
It will show up every day on your doorstep.
It's taking your kids to school.
Right.
It's going to the grocery store. It's making sure that your bills are being paid. The house is clean. The repairs are being done. All that non-sexy stuff in our life that contributes the grind that gives us order and maintenance to our lives. And yet, they're not necessarily highly impactful toward our purpose, but yet if we don't get those things done, it begins to be like a source of mud that our purpose gets undermined by.
Well, you would describe, I mean, in an organization, it would be the quality goes down, the service quality goes down, because if there's an erosion of your pay the rent, you're not meeting basic expectations of life, of the life of your business or your personal life. So I want to head in a different direction, 7 through 10s. And I think about that 2.7 on the scale of 0 to 10 for leaders when they're 2.7 and 7 through 10s. And I want you to describe the impact of toxicity or the impact of somebody who's in your organization whose self-belief isn't at a place where they even can engage in the organizational life in a healthy way.
So let's give the definition first for what actually, let me use a number of 8 through 10.
8 through 10.
8 through 10s are those things that we're being asked to do or expected to do that does not contribute in any meaningful way towards our purpose. And it actually, while you're doing those 8 through 10s, it actually gets in the way of performing the necessary through 7s.
Yes.
When those are the things that suck the life out of us. And what we find is the people who have found life balance are able to, one, we tell people, don't worry about, is this a 6 or is this a 4 or is this don't worry about it. 3 through 7s take a life of their own every day. The key is, are you intentional about knowing what the 8 through 10s are? Those things that you're doing, that they may be busy work, but they're not adding true impact in your life. And we tell people that I had one person say, well, is it okay if I say no to an 8, 9, and 10 today, but I put it on the calendar tomorrow? No, an 8, 9, and 10 today is an 8, 9, and 10 tomorrow. The point is, you say no to those things. Now, sometimes it may require some time to unwind those 8, 9s, and 10s. But 8, 9s, and 10s, you say, no, that's not on purpose. And it's not a good use of my time. That requires discipline to do that. Now, let's talk about 8, 9s, and 10s at the workplace. 8, 9s, and 10s are those, and we're not talking about the value of that person, that they're less of value as a human being. But an 8, 9, and 10 person is someone that is, they're toxic. They're narcissistic. They're not interested in the good of the organization or the good of the team. They want their agenda always being done first. And they wear you out. They suck the life out of you. They suck the life out of the team. They create distractions over and over. And what we find is that low self-belief leaders will not address the 8, 9, and 10 people that are toxifying the team. We've seen that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things to identify when we go in and work and assess the teams that we're working with is, what's their mindset? What's their attitude for the team? Are they contributing in a positive way? Because if you, I think about a couple of people come to mind as you were talking about that. And I think of one of them was a contrarian. Somebody who, no matter what the idea was, no matter what, they would be against the idea, right? Like for whatever reason, they would throw up all kinds of roadblocks, or they would be against the idea for the sake of being against the idea of change. And that can be very harmful to an organization that's trying to grow, evolve, develop, because when you're trying to implement strategy, do you win on day one? Do you win on day one? No, it takes time. You've got to stick with it. You've got to get through that grind phase of making new habits in the organization. So I think of some of the activities of a contrarian and the weight that I'll call it an anchor, that it puts on a team. And
Not a good anchor that creates stability, but an anchor
Very-
that weighs you down and
Yes.
drags behind and requires you to work harder to get up to the same
Yes.
speed.
And again, I'll go back to leadership skill set and the things that you taught me and we teach teams today is calling that what it is really important, and putting that on the table that it is an 8, 9, and 10. And we may need to if that person isn't willing to change and get on board, right? Like get in the program, it may be time for them to exit the organization. And I think about the beginning, you talked about people going through multiple organizations, multiple careers. Organizations grow. Organizations outgrow people. People outgrow organizations. And so in the past, that badge of honor of being with an organization 40 years it looks different today if you think about contribution to the success of the organization. You have to be growing with the organization and be aligned. If you know your purpose and the organization knows what its purpose is, that's alignment, and that's where people get momentum.
Characteristics of 8, 9, and 10 folks that are in the 1 and 2, there's an old saying that 20% of your people will get 80% of the work done on your team.
It's not possible today in today's fast pace.
Why?
Speed and quality are everything.
It takes greater
both.
contribution from more than
Yes.
just 2 superstars.
Yes.
And so an 8, 9, and 10 person would be someone that we describe as always challenging the agreed upon standard. They're always challenging. They're constantly not performing to the standard. They always have a reason why, always an excuse. And you find yourself just being worn out by that person. And if you let that person get away with that by not creating accountability, everybody sees it. And by allowing that to happen, they lower the standard. And the person who is lowering the standard is setting the true standard, actually is leading the organization. So if you've got people on your team that are lowering the standard and you're by their performance and you're allowing that to happen, what you're doing is you're abdicating your leadership.
How so?
Well,
how are you abdicating, and how does that play itself out with a 2.7, a leader who thinks they're not enough?
So there are 2 ways to set a standard. There is to determine the standard and agree upon on it as a team. You do it in what we call above the table fashion. But another way a standard is set is if there's someone who keeps violating the standard and you let it happen and everyone sees it. So when you try to hold other people to that higher standard, they will, in their minds, go, well, why aren't you holding that person to the standard? And if you're not going to hold them, why are you holding me? What they're really doing is rejecting accountability. And so they are setting the standard, that person is setting the standard by under the table performance and you allowing it to happen.
You know, I've just finished some really difficult work with an organization, and that message across the team became loud and clear when the leader was not upholding the standard. And it's one of those leadership skill sets that sometimes if you're not paying attention to what the verbal, the nonverbal, the resistance, the non-resistance, who is your team following, who are they not following, what is the standard and how are people measuring up to the standard, you'll miss really, really key changes that need to happen. And I think one of the things when you're at the executive level and you've missed that's really important is to give yourself grace, especially when you identify it and you deal with it, because just in dealing with it, that's tough. That is tough. That is some of the hardest work to do. And you can't, leading from a 2.7 does not allow you to actually address and tackle the issues that all of what you're describing creates.
It takes bold courage to be a leader today.
Yep.
And I think about the person who is allowed to set a lower standard than what everybody has said on paper. This is the standard, what we talk about in all the meetings. And you allow this person, this 8, 9, and 10, to reset the standard. They are what we call a sacred cow. A sacred cow is someone who everyone knows is lowering the standard. Everyone's talking about it in the meetings after the meeting, but nothing is being done. That person is actually now leading the organization from under the table. And what will happen is the official leader above the table will lose the rest of the team out of a lack of respect that you talk about the standard, but you don't have the courage to uphold the standard. That is tough in leadership, and you better believe in yourself.
Yes.
Because those kind of conversations and those kinds of actions to get that, to clean those messes up, man, they're hard.
They are hard, and they're insidious. 8s, 9s, and 10s can be really insidious in the organization. In other words, because of the operating under the table and not being upfront, which is why it goes back to why leadership, the transition to modern leadership, about being transparent, being authentic, talking about issues, asking for help when you need to be asking for help. When you have a leader who is not willing to do that, you bet they're operating under the table. When they're not willing to get into a collaborative, a thought process of how do we solve this problem and really engage in the team, we know that we have a challenge in an organization.
It's one thing to talk about this. It's another thing to do it. And we've all made mistakes by allowing certain people to go along even though we all knew was a problem child, because we didn't want to have to deal with the discomfort of addressing it. We didn't want to deal with the backlash. And every person has followers. And it's bold to have a very frank conversation and a plan to get that person aligned with the rest of the team. And if they don't, there are consequences. And often that gets messy. And I remember, I made a mistake that I had someone on my team at an earlier time that I allowed that person because I cared about that person. And that person had been there for me on a personal level. And loyalty is really important to me. And I had a blind eye. And I kept turning and saying, well, I know that they're not setting the standard, but they're doing things over here and over here and over here, even though those over here really weren't the things that we needed. And when I finally had to own up to the fact that I was not living up to my leadership responsibilities and I addressed the issue, it was hard. But I also had to own that to the team. I had to say to the team that, look, this is the mistake that I made, and I have to take responsibility for that. And you can take it to the bank that I'm not going to knowingly do that anymore. But if you see me doing that, you got to hold me accountable. Man, that's where you find real growth in your leadership in those tough times.
I want you to speak to, because I think sometimes, we can get talking about the toxicity in an organization or what that looks like, what that feels like, how to overcome it. The fact of the matter is we don't go in looking for it. And I want you to describe just in a nutshell how it shows up for us, how it becomes like a glaring light when we're working with an organization from an outside perspective, and why the process is so effective in upholding the standard.
So toxic individuals will melt in a healthy environment. And a toxic individual will look at a healthy individual, a healthy climate, and call that toxic. Because a toxic individual wants secrets. They want conversations that are not aligned. In public, in the meeting, they'll go like this. But after the meeting, they're classic for having meetings after the meeting where they try to undermine what the team just agreed upon right there. And so what we have found is that the more transparent the team becomes, and the more safe that the team begins to be about holding accountable their teammates who are not living up to the standard that we've always agreed upon. We call that sideways accountability.
I was just going to say it requires feedback. It
Yes.
requires teams to get really rigorous about feedback.
Yes.
In the moment, when it happens, and what's the growth
And
opportunity.
it's not judging that person.
No,
It is evaluating that person against the commitment that they made and that we made together. And so we find that when you create an environment of healthy sideways accountability, of transparency, and where people are free, are expected to use their voice,
Yeah.
unhealthy, toxic people can't function in an environment like that because they need to function under the table. And healthy teams don't allow under the table agendas or under the table behavior to exist without confrontation. There's a lot to this. And if I don't believe in myself and believe in my purpose and believe in upholding the values of the team that we've all agreed upon, if I don't believe in myself, I'm going to let this person continue to run all over me and run over the rest of the team. And so isn't it fascinating that we've talked about life balance, we've talked about boundaries, we've talked about protecting the standard, and it all transpires around this whole thing of self-belief.
Yes. Yeah.
So we've got just a couple minutes left. What would you say to the audience if there's one thing that you would tell the audience, there is one thing that I would tell you to hold on to no matter what, that you've learned in your life, what would you tell them?
Lead myself first before I lead others. And as I'm leading others, build culture through authenticity, vulnerability, relationship, and team.
And I would say, know who you are, do the work to understand what your purpose is,
Yeah.
what are your non-negotiable values, and then what are those 2 or 3 ones and twos that if you make sure you give attention to on a daily basis, your life will stay aligned with your purpose. Know yourself, know what your decision frame is to stay on purpose. Pretty powerful. It is great to spend time with you.
It's been fun. Thanks so much for having me on, Fred.
You're welcome.
Dr. Fred.
Again, we are so glad that you could join us for this conversation. There's a lot of meat here, a lot of really thought-provoking, provocative content that we've brought out together. By the way, you get strong leaders together in the room and you create a safe environment, it's crazy how magic happens. Same thing will happen with your team. Create a safe environment. Put your best people in that environment. Create a free environment for them to be themselves. Magic will happen. And so join us again. By the way, if you haven't attended one of our think tanks that we do on a monthly basis, check us out on our website, initiative-1.com. That's ONE.com. You'll learn a lot about us. We have hundreds and hundreds of people around the country who join in on that. And it's their first taste, their first step into exploring the purpose of the think tanks. It's not our work. It's an introduction to the work that we actually do. We invite you to be a part of that. It's our complimentary gift to our Initiative One community. It is good to be with you. We hope you'll join us again. Thank you again, Tracy.
Welcome.